especially in mountains, living in mountains or in islands, which are likely to be excluded from the new advanced medical services. And in every village, we have built information village centers to make those residents to keep income increase just by direct transaction of their products. Maybe these kinds of models can be very useful to African countries. To summarize my presentation, as I said to you, we can think of two roles of ICT. The existing roles for productivity, efficiency, or good services. Yeah, of course, we should do that. But beyond these roles, the new roles should be for value creation or problem solving or tackling for social issues with new technologies. Personally, I call this kind of role change, I call it Copernicus transformation of ICT. What I'm trying to say is that the main target of ICT is from now on the society and its issues to be tackled, rather than ICT development itself. So if we should think of the new roles of ICT, then I think we can pursue more opportunities toward happiness, transparency, or living together, or hope in the future. Concluding my remark, in fact, while preparing my presentation files, I have found a very interesting and very important fact. The GDP per capita and the GNI of African countries are far better than those of Korea before informatization. So thus, I firmly believe that as ICT has played the pivotal role for economic development in Korea, as African countries, they have an abundance of potential. I think ICT will play a great pivotal role for economic development, far better beyond the level of Korea. I think success requires a proactive and bold ICT investment in each country based on the great leadership, strong leadership from the top. Korea is always ready to share our experiences for the ICT, social and economic development of African countries. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Quite an interesting insight on what Korea has achieved through ICT and what innovations have been put in place. As we move forward in our discussions this afternoon, I'd like to kindly request my panelists just to quickly, 1 minute, introduce yourself to our audience, and then we'll pick up from there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Clement Wageneza. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Rwanda Online, the company behind Irembo, which is the e-government portal to government services to citizens and businesses in Rwanda. Irembo currently has digitized 50 government services and serves on average 150,000 people monthly. Through three access channels mainly, through our web portal, irembo.gov.rw, through feature phone based on USSD technology. 15 of our 50 services are available on that channel and therefore more accessible to the majority of Rwandans. And lastly, they are accessible through a network of agents who are private operator who can assist citizens who don't have any device or access to connectivity to still get the benefit of Irembo closer to them. We have a network of almost 1,400 agents across the country. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Daron from N Friends, the CEO and founder of the company. What we're doing is digitizing entire ecosystems today in the emerging markets, specifically in Africa and Southeast Asia. And when I say digitizing ecosystems, it means that we're bringing everybody to the digital world today. So if it's a city, we're looking at bringing all the citizens of the city. If it's a bank, so it means that a bank can now provide their services to all their customers. And when I'm saying all their customers, it's not just customers with smartphones or with tablets, it's everybody. But everybody's using the same platform. Everybody's accessing the same services and the same capabilities, and they can do that today. Today we have 15 million end customers using our platform, mainly in Africa and in Southeast Asia, as I mentioned. And I'll give you an example of a solution that we're doing is a branchless banking solution that we have, as of today, 3.5 million customers, but it's really hard to count because every minute there's more. Like a year ago, there's 500,000, 180,000 agents, all of that in Indonesia. And that means that we're including everybody in the financial world, and that's one layer of a service that we're providing. On top of those services, we bring additional layers of, again, digitizing entire ecosystems in agriculture, in FMCG, et cetera. And we're working with Rwanda Online here as part of Irembo, and also working with Microsoft that you'll hear in a second. And part of our back-end technology and some of the most sophisticated technologies from Microsoft are in our back-end, enabling us to provide solutions like Dynamics 365 to the entire ecosystem, things that can't be done today.
Good afternoon. My name is Louis Otieno. I'm a director with Microsoft Middle East and Africa, responsible for corporate affairs for Africa. For Africa, there is spelled with a 4 and the C is a K. It's an organization that was created by Microsoft about 5 years ago, committed to and aligned to the aspirations of Africa as a continent, seeking to help Africa accelerate its economic growth, as well as, basically develop the markets in Africa. So we do that basically by focusing, working with young people, the youth, for obvious reasons, small and medium enterprises, given their contributions in terms of economic development, and we appreciate the role of government, so youth, SMEs, as well as government. In the areas of innovation, and that's broad, beyond technological innovation, it's around business model innovation, as well as skills, and that's beyond K through 12, it's skills for entrepreneurship, skills for employment, and access. It's about connections as well as access to devices and stuff like that. So essentially, how we operate is we invest in a promising idea in a country, and as a company, we invest in it, take the risk in it, with a view of ensuring that it's relevant, but more importantly, establishing the sustainability model for that idea. And then ultimately, if that's successful, along with our partners, we will seek to scale across Africa. So I'll get a chance a little later to give you specific examples, but that's the work that I do. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm honored to be with such an impressive and interesting group of people on the panel. My name is Melissa Johns. I am the Senior Director for Insights and Impact at the Digital Impact Alliance. My role is really to advance the research, the knowledge, and advocacy work for this new organization to serve and advance a more inclusive digital society. We are housed within the United Nations Foundation, and we seek to directly support those who are providing digital solutions to underserved populations around the world. Those may be donors or NGOs or governments themselves, and always seeking to include the private sector in those types of conversations. So I heard the term at lunch, and I think it applies, that a mediator amongst all of the different groups, everyone with the same goal to provide more effective digital solutions for the world's underserved.
Good afternoon. My name is Sheila Birgen. I am from iHub and MLab East Africa. iHub is an innovation hub in Nairobi, and we have three key products. One is a co-working workspace, which is basically a membership program. And then we also have Entrepreneurship Journey, which is a support system for entrepreneurs who want to grow sustainable businesses from idea all the way to when they leave the different programs that we have. We also have innovation journeys for corporates and individuals or startups that want to build different products. So we give them support, technical support, using different methodologies to help them grow and scale different products that they have. So over and above that, we have the incubation arm of iHub, which is the MLab. So after your entrepreneurship journey, where do you go? Where do you accelerate your startup? So you go through our incubation arm or acceleration, depending on how you want to define that, and that's MLab. Thank you.
A very good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Indrajit Banerjee, Director of the Knowledge Societies Division. And as you might have seen, the term information society is still very currently used. We at UNESCO launched the concept of knowledge societies in 2005 at the Second World Summit on Information Society in Geneva. The main activities of this division, Knowledge Societies Division, is to promote universal access to and preservation of information. And we work in areas such as disabilities, open solutions, preservation of documentary heritage, and a range of other initiatives. We believe that what UNESCO brings to the table, which is unique, unlike most other agencies, at least the international agencies, is that we have a much more holistic approach towards the concept of access. We believe connectivity is just the basics, and that access, as I hope I will get a chance to say later, means much more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A nice, quick introduction to our very knowledgeable panelists. I'm actually humbled to be moderating you. I'll probably learn quite a lot by the end of this session. Let me start off with Louis. How does Microsoft visualize the city of the future, especially given the fact that a lot of African cities are rapidly growing? There's a lot of dynamism, modernization, and basically they're the centers of innovation, if I may say that. And I had you talk about innovation, skills, access, and how we can tie all this into guaranteing that we become the smart cities that we desire to be. What do you see the role of Microsoft being in championing this as well?
Thank you again, Louise. So as we have heard pretty much all day, urbanization is happening, even here in Africa. I would say the difference is it's happening fast here in Africa. And it's happening with a whole bunch of people coming into cities armed with devices these days. They're also connected, they're familiar with platforms like social media, etc. So effectively, the relationships in a city between governors and citizens is almost flipped from an expectation point of view. It's really about the citizens. I therefore envision, much as we have different cities and they'll all look different depending on their circumstances, I envision cities that, one, will look to engage with the citizens, or to put it differently, would look to respond to the expectations of the citizens. These are demanding people even here in Africa today, okay? I also expect cities internally to empower their staff, their employees, in order for them to respond to the various and quickly evolving requirements of citizens, in order to maintain satisfaction levels or expectations of those citizens. Given the realities that the pace of urbanization may not be matched by the resources that are available to the cities in forms of tax income and ways to continue running operations, I therefore also expect these cities to find ways to optimize the way they operate, not only within themselves, but with other entities, different departments within that organization, but even across to other cities. So I expect optimization from an ICT point of view. And ultimately, these three things, effectively, better engaging with citizens, empowering the people, as well as optimizing operations, are things that should allow for our cities to transform themselves. And what I mean by that is that they will be able to create new services on the basis of the demands of citizens. So citizens first, government being able to respond to citizens. Now, from Microsoft perspective, and very specifically for Africa, as I just defined earlier on when I opened up the discussion, when I introduced myself. We see transformation, we support in the transformation of cities to being smart cities in the following ways. One way is finding ways to make available affordable access, affordable connectivity for those who currently are either unserved, meaning they don't have access at all, or underserved, which means they may be accessed but they can't afford it as a function of the technologies that they're using. So quite specifically, we are running several pilots or initiatives across Africa around the use of TV spectrum in what we're calling TV white spaces initiatives. These are way more affordable alternatives to the current technologies we have available, both from a CAPEX point of view in terms of the cost it will take to build those networks. They're using long waves, and therefore the penetration of the waves is, just to illustrate, your router in this room probably goes some 200 meters. The same device using that band will probably go 10 kilometers. So one of those will basically cover 314 square kilometers. So that basically represents effectively the cost of the CAPEX. And because they're using long waves, the cost of OPEX is also low because the power required to run that infrastructure is low enough to be generated by the sun, and we have plenty of sun in Africa. So the combination of that completely disrupts the models as we understand them today in terms of cost. And it's something we've demonstrated now, and it's something we're discussing, and regulators need to basically factor it in. So we're doing that work in terms of affordable access. As a company, we have invested heavily in putting together a public cloud that's trustworthy, that's responsible, and that's inclusive, as I've just finished describing. And in the process, making available some of our products that you may be familiar with, Azure, Office 365, and other things like that. So effectively, with cloud technologies, you now have affordable ways of digitally transforming. With the computing power available in cloud, you're able to now translate or convert the big data, the data that's generated by all the devices that you have. You're able to transform that into information, and more importantly to me, transform information into intelligence that can be used in creative ways. And then lastly, we invest in innovation in quite specific ways in the context of what we're talking about, because the reality is that urbanization is going to continue to happen, and it's going to happen in an accelerated way. This creates all manner of problems, all of which I'm sure you're familiar with: traffic, use, limited water, limited resources, pollution, and all those things that we will call problems. I like to say in Africa here, we are blessed with challenges and opportunities. And I think with the investment we're making in skills, affordable technology, and the young people, such as the people who work within the within the hubs, we're creating a situation where these young people should be able to address those challenges and to convert them into opportunities and ways of generating or making a living in the process. And we have a specific program with regard to government that we call Innovate for Government, Innovate for Gov, where effectively a government defines its problems or challenges, puts out a request for proposals for any number of local developers or those who are interested in bidding. And we, upon selection of one or two of those, we will invest in that company to ensure that what they produce is world class, based on the skills that we invest in, and they're using the right tools, etc. So we have a specific program to support the work around transforming our cities towards becoming smart cities. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Louis. Just picking up from three key elements that you highlighted: citizen engagement, empowerment, and most importantly, optimization of operations. Clément, you've done quite a lot with Rwanda Online, specifically Irembo. Maybe give us a bit of insight on how this has been a success. What are the lessons learned? How can we drive this forward to probably make it even an increased opportunity? And what can we learn from this experience?
Thank you, Liliane. So the starting point of what we do at Rwanda Online and with Irembo is the satisfaction of accessing government services for each citizen or business that needs to access this service through our platform. How we approached it from the beginning was to see, was through, first of all, a public-private partnership with the government of Rwanda. And the idea behind was, look, you need to improve service delivery and government service delivery to citizens. And you have two ways of doing it. Either you really go and do a long study, and doing a long study pinpoints the real problem and the issues that the customers go through during the journey to getting a government service. And from there, you go and digitize or create the algorithm that put these services online and make it easier to access. Or the other way that we actually are approaching and using is to say, look, let us move as fast as possible and deliver quickly services, put them online, make them available through different channels possible. Our services are accessible online, on mobile, and through our network of agents. And then put in place mechanisms within which, through the journey that they go through accessing the service through Irembo, learn as much as possible, so to constantly iterate and improve towards reaching the maximum level of satisfaction or maximum level of ease to accessing this service. So to apply an example of one of the services we have online, which is among the most used, is birth certificate. So when we put it online, it was among the first services that we launched in July 2015. We just had a form that people filled in. We only have a way to pay, which was to go to a bank branch and pay for the service. And then people would go collect the birth certificate still at their closest sector office. So now, as we iterated around it and we increased the number of payment channels, we also put the service on USSD. Then it started reducing the number of trips that people needed to incur. So at launch, first time, majority of the people would need to go to an Irembo agent, so that's a trip. When we launched it on mobile phone, now 40 or close to 30% use their own phone to apply and pay for the service because they can pay with their mobile money. So now you have for 40% of the users improved accessibility of the service by reducing the trips. So basically, this is how we constantly iterate around the service based on the whole structure that we have to learn how people access the service that we already put online. The ultimate goal, of course, for this service, and based on what we learned, is more than 60% of the applicants of this service do apply for a birth certificate to go use it to subscribe to an insurance policy. So what if we made it so that insurance companies do no longer require people to bring birth certificates because they can directly interconnect with other systems and get the information? Then you remove the need for 60% of the people to have to apply for this service to go do something else. And that's the ultimate goal when we look at how we constantly iterate to ease government service. So basically, that's what we do on a daily basis. And we do not yet believe we are successful. We track our success around three main metrics. First of all is the number of services that we are able to put online. We today have 50 services. Our goal is to be at 100 service, at least 100 services by the end of the year. And constantly accelerating the pace at which we put service online, basically get more and more people connected and involved within and accessing government in a better way. Second is number of users for the services that we have online, because the uptake has a certain way it goes. So when we put a service online, it might first be accessible for people within cities and people who have accessibility, but us figuring out how, as fast as possible, we get this service closer to everyone by, first of all, involving as much as possible our network of agents. We have 1,400 agents across the country who, if we even innovate in the way they are trained on how to assist citizens on new services we put online. So instead of organizing physical training, they start getting trained online, and by the time we put a service online, 2-3 days after, they are able to assist the citizen in the most reliable way. Then we accelerate reach, and we accelerate the number of people who can more efficiently access government through our ecosystem. And third is the user satisfaction rate. So we track this by, of course, counting a number of things. It can be number of trips that people still need to do. It can be number of calls, or percentage of calls we get to our call center based on each service and based on the number of applications for this service. It can be the surveys that we do on a monthly basis on each service to see what are the customer journey, how many trips, what are the pain points that they face. So by tracking all this and constantly learn from it and figuring ways to constantly iterate as fast as possible is what in the long run will accelerate not only adoption of technology by other service providers, but also will accelerate the way and will increase the efficiency for government in the way they interact with the citizens and business across. Yeah.
Thank you, Clement. Doron, when you introduced yourself, you said the goal at the end of it all is to be able to create platforms for all. I hear from Clement the importance of interconnectivity. You might provide a service to a government service, But at the end of it all, the goal is to have this service interact or interconnect with a different private sector service. What would you see as incentives for stakeholders, private sector, government, different players in the market, to be able to stimulate or invest in these kinds of innovations and to invest in the kind of work that both you at NFriends and Rwanda Online take the time to invest in or to innovate in? What do you see as an incentive for stakeholders to play an important role?
So first of all, I think it's critical to reach out to the mass market. We're all talking about smart cities and ICT and technologies, and in many cases, this is just creating a wider divide between the top end of the economic families and the mass market. I think that the target of having everybody working on the same platform, using the same services, is a critical and critical for the world, critical for all the countries. For us as a company, we see that as an opportunity. First of all, we're the only ones that know how to solve that issue of bringing really the mass market into the same platforms, into the cloud, into using the most sophisticated software today, and using the same processes like you would use on a smartphone. So it means that now anybody can use those capabilities. But it also means that whoever's using it on a smartphone or on a tablet is using the same service, and they're not using a cutting-edge solution. So everybody has to use the same platform, the same services, the same capabilities, but access it through the device or the mobile data that they can afford. And once you can really access the mass market in an affordable way, so obviously there's a lot of ways for us as a company, we're a for-profit company, is to make money. And that's what can generate the capabilities of bringing more and more services. The way that we look at the market, especially when you're going into mass market, one of the issues is how does the mass market know how to use these services? And one of the ways that we found is a great manner to leverage is large enterprises. A large enterprise could be a large bank, it could be a large agriculture company, it could be a city, it could be a government. Obviously, these large organizations have the intention for the mass market to use it, or they're making more money, or as a city or as a government, they're creating a better country for this, a better system for the citizens. So here, when we're looking at marketing and training and getting the word out, we get great partners to work with us. They have all the incentives to do that. If it's a large company like a bank, they have obviously the incentives because if they have more customers, they're making more money. If it's a government, obviously they want it to get out to all the citizens. So it means that a lot of our marketing costs, a lot of our training issues are not gone, but significantly reduced. And as a partnership company, we're not afraid to partner with the government, with private companies, in order to provide this type of solution. In addition to that, it's important that there's a critical mass of services. Coming out with one service to the users is really not effective. If Rwanda Online would have only birth certificates, I would guess there are not going to be too many users. But having 50 services makes it something that you reach out to the citizens, they understand, and they go into the mindset that they can reach out and use Rwanda Online platform in order to access more than one service. So now if there's a new service, they can first of all go and look if it's on Rwanda Online. Same goes with a bank. So a bank, when a bank is looking at services, you have to have a certain amount of critical mass of services. Just showing account balance, that's not enough for everybody to use the service. Providing all the services to somebody on a laptop is easy, but providing it to the mass market, it's a whole different mindset. So you have to really create the right technology. It has to be affordable for everybody, for the bank, for the end users. And you have to create the whole ecosystem of agents that know, that also get the supporting technology to make sure that everybody can use these services. And it should be a combination. When you're looking at the mass market, you would first start with, obviously, services like account balance. Everybody has to know that. But then you have to look at additional capabilities that you can bring to the people that can also make money for the bank. Because if they're only spreading information of financial education, it's going to become a CSR project and they're going to kill the project. But if they can bring in microloans and generate revenues and bring benefits to the users, that's great. If now we can bring an agriculture company that is automating their whole supply chain and bringing in the farmers into this ecosystem, and these farmers are providing information to a large company, to a large agri-company that is buying from them, and in return for providing that information, because this large agri-company needs traceability and can make more money from traceability or from a more efficient ecosystem, a supply chain, then they get a higher price for their crops. Now, this agri-company has more information about their users, their transactions, how they operate. If they can, through our platform, provide that information to a bank, on their will, obviously, then they can create a stronger relationship with their farmers, because now their farmers are most likely to receive a loan. So when I'm saying building an ecosystem and connecting everybody, it's really this level by level, bringing these services and bringing the mass market into the ecosystem, and everybody's benefiting from this process.
Okay, great. Thank you, Doron. I keep hearing mass market, trying to optimize, looking at ways of innovating, ways of being dynamic. But at the end of it all, it comes back to the citizens and guaranteeing that it's actually inclusive for all. This is something you kept highlighting during your introduction and even earlier as we spoke. Help me understand and help our audience understand a bit more what governments can do to be able to drive this. What kind of initiatives or investments should we see governments or other key players directly impact on to be able to guarantee inclusivity?
Thank you, and so many rich points that have been already made by the panelists, but I see a role for government in so many different aspects of this. I'll just focus on two, and I'm sure that the others will come out through the resulting conversation. We'll encourage others to add their perspectives as well. The first would be on supporting these types of innovative business models that we're hearing about. Governments have a clear role to play in this. I think the example from the Republic of Korea is key. Being housed here in Rwanda is key. Both governments have done a great deal to support different types of investments, different types of partnerships, different types of deals that either could be stopped because the regulators would be afraid of them or not understand them, or could be supportive by a more flexible approach to business regulation and supporting an enabling environment for innovative business solutions. So that's something that we have examples from around the world of governments taking this approach. We have examples here on the continent, and I think it's something that can be spread, and I do see the trend of that type of more innovative, business-friendly, citizen-centered government service spreading around the world, and particularly in Africa. There's also a role for the government to play in protecting what you all are producing, the intellectual property rights, or some of the other property rights, or the other innovative aspects of the work. This is through good, fair, decent, active enforcement of the rules that are already in place. It's through continually updating the regulations to take into account and properly protect these types of new deliveries or technologies. And it's also through fair, efficient courts systems, if it gets to that point, that at least provides a backstop as a way to encourage greater risk-taking by the private sector, because they know that there's going to be a more even playing environment within the country. And finally, I would say within this first aspect of supporting innovative business models, there's also a key role for the governments, particularly in Africa, to work with donors, either the traditional donors, I've heard the World Bank mentioned a couple of times, also several active governments here in Africa, in providing risk capital or other types of financing options. There's not as active of an equity market here in Africa, but there are opportunities. I would encourage non-traditional sources of funding as well. There's a booming philanthropic focus or activity in Silicon Valley that would be particularly of interest, I think, to them, the type of work that's been discussed here. And it would be a nice way to type of bridge either these last mile solutions or these other types of new service delivery that in the end might be sustainable financially, but need that significant upfront capital and operating investment. So that would be a key area for governments to help to support. The second I would really encourage is the use of data in government planning and government service delivery. So Louis touched upon it. There's an extraordinary richness in the new types of data that are available, primarily these mobile, from mobile operators. But then when you match that with the geospatial data that are available, other more traditional sources of population or poverty statistics, governments have a new opportunity to greatly improve the planning of their services. Health, education, agriculture, electricity, or other type of infrastructure planning, transport is a very commonly one used. And these methods have been proven but not implemented on the ground. I think we do come to an issue of translation between the technology experts, the government officials, and the businessmen. I think if we can help merge some of the language that is used, the different perspectives can really result in much better services and much greater opportunities for Africans. Another just subcomponent of the opportunity is the government data that is already produced but kept inside government walls. Making that more available to the private sector would create many more opportunities. It's slowly opening up in the West and in other European countries, but has been slow to take off in different places, either because it's protected or in a form that's not usable or just too low of quality to be able to depend upon. And then I'll just wrap up again just on the regulation side on clear rules for the use of these data, for the some confidence and security and predictability for the firms that want to use either both the data or these new innovative solutions. These are obvious opportunities for governments to create clear rules of the road, to apply them in an efficient and effective and even-keeled manner, and encourage the growth and sustainability of the exciting firms that have been started here and discussed already, and I know that we'll hear from my colleague with the IHAB. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. Indrajit, Melissa said something about having putting in place systems that allow access to government data or to other sources of data. You touched upon this as well in your introduction, universal access to information. How can we, or what kind of policy considerations can we expect from cities or authorities that can be able to drive access or universal access to information and to guarantee that we can be able to leverage all the data that's available in the market?
Thank you. It's a pretty complex question to answer, so I will not try and venture into a long spiel on this. But I think the availability of data has increased and phenomenally. And today we talk about open data, big data, And there's a lot of data available, but the point of the problem is not so much the availability of data as it is the question of access. And that's a key issue. And if you just take examples, I mean, when we talk about access to information, we very rarely realize that there are very serious challenges to access which go way beyond connectivity, as I was saying earlier. For example, if you simply look at the number of languages on the internet, out of some 7,000 odd official languages which are recognized, and not to mention the thousands of dialects, only about 400, 450 are online. So this also becomes a problem, especially when it comes to access to educational resources, etc., that a large amount of content is in a very few languages. To continue further with some data on this particular question, English and Chinese account for more than 50% of the content on the internet. So imagine the rest is divided, and the 10 top languages in the world have about 80% of the content on the internet. So there are language issues, there are accessibility issues in terms of a person with disabilities. Considering the fact that there are 1 billion people who suffer from some form of disability, when you talk about 3.5 billion people being on the internet, everybody starts clapping, and then one wonders what's going to happen to that 1 billion unfortunate people who will find it very, very difficult. So that is my basic premise, that accessibility has to be seen in a much more holistic, larger sense, and those challenges have to be overcome. But to come to issues of government data, there has been tremendous progress made, as several fellow panelists mentioned, in terms of e-government services. I know, coming from India, what a phenomenal transformation we have undergone in terms of availability of e-government services and so on. Challenges still exist, but I don't think they're insurmountable. I think governments know today that citizens demand greater transparency, greater accountability, and I think this has been one of the driving forces of greater access to government data, government services. And I think more and more governments are also realizing, like in my country, India, that it has improved the economic performance phenomenally. I mean, imagine the Indian Railways, which I don't know carries how many million passengers per day. You had to go and stand for hours in a ticket counter, and that was painful for them. It was not cost effective. It was a real nuisance, I mean. And then they decided one fine day to do all ticketing online. And today there are hardly any queues. It's become very easy, etc. The burden on government to provide these services become much less. So we're seeing giant strides being taken, actually, even in the least developing countries. There is progress being made. The political will has to be there. That, again, remains a big challenge. When you see, even in countries like in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, the advent of the Right to Information Act has made governments feel very threatened, because today anybody can go and say, I want to see the data on this particular issue, or my land records, or whatever. Nobody can just snatch your land away. So I think in terms of policy, the political commitment comes first. Policies, very good examples exist. I think Korea, the Korean example, is a brilliant example. Many other countries which have tremendous e-government services. And it is for developing countries to pick it up and realize, and I think this is crucial, that political commitment comes and the political will starts moving when it is very clearly shown to them how they benefit from it. They say, oh, it's great, all of you have access to all this data, but what do we get from it? Because we have to be more transparent, there'll be less corruption, people will question us on everything we say. So I think that's still a deadlock there in terms of opening up all this data which is available. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sheila, innovation, incubation, acceleration. Give us a bit more insight on that from the perspective of MLab. How can cities build capacity, develop the skills that are in the market, And maybe I'll add an additional component of saying how can women even play a very pivotal role in this. Gender is always a very, very important aspect to everything. So give us the touch of gender influence in this as well. Let us help us understand what the role of women could be in innovation, incubation, and acceleration as well.
Well, I'll come to the last question you've asked after this. I'd just like to start with the digital service delivery bit about government developing skills. Well, the ITU Secretary General today said 75% of people in Africa are not using the internet. 75%. So even as we try and grow digital economies, we have to remember that 75% of this continent of extremely young people are not using the internet. How can we, as governments, as private sector, as individuals, make sure that all these people are included in this transformation, if you want to call it? I think one of the key things that needs to happen is infrastructure has to be developed. Because even if we say, well, we will get everyone to be included in this, how do they access it if infrastructure has not been developed? So infrastructure has to be developed either by government, by making sure that they include policies of digital transformation in every other service that they do. So basically in development strategies, digital service delivery is key in every sector. So include that in policies. Secondly, even as they develop infrastructure, connectivity is great, but accessibility is better. Making sure that everybody within these different cities, and especially rural areas, can access digital services, it will be great. We can launch e-citizen platforms and whatnot, but if people do not know how to use these services, they do not know how to access these services, or they cannot access these services, in a way they are still not being served. So we cannot grow cities or our citizens if we do not have inclusion in it. Another thing that I think needs to happen is to make sure that we support innovation and experimentation learning across the board. We know how to read and write because we learned from school. This can be integrated in our education system, then it makes it almost obvious that you need to know this. So it's not a complementary skill to have. It's not a, well, I have this, I'm better. It's we all have this. And especially the younger generation that you are growing, we must ensure that they are included in this from the get-go. So even as they come into the economies, they don't have to learn anything new. They already know how to handle it. So if it's accessing services, for instance, you don't have to again train them after. We build those services now, but then they just access them easily because they've been nurtured to know that. About having women included in this. I was talking to someone and she told me, we were actually talking about sports, and she said, you see, you cannot win any game if you bench half of the team, right? So the same thing, you cannot expect to grow this if you do not include women. So it's just in the policies, have policies that support youth, women, and people with disability, and let these policies be an incentive to either private sector or government, and they must be implemented. You cannot say, well, it's written, and then no one practices, then what's the point? You know, make sure that if these policies are put in place, then there must be, and especially government has to be leading in this. If it's a policy, then it has to just make sure that if you are driving the digital economy and we want to deliver services digitally, we have to put women in leadership in this. and include them in the institutions that run this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sheila. I'm assuming that our audience probably has a million questions and clarifications they'd like to get from our panelists. Unfortunately, given that we have a very short schedule, we'll only take 3 questions. Okay, we'll start with the gentleman at the left, my left. Please keep it brief and to the point so that we can be able to, and then specify the panelists you'd like to address your question. Thank you.
My question is on policy and innovation. Don't we think that in Africa, our major problem is that in everything, we are quick to talk about policy? For example, as a programmer, as a software programmer, once you start developing a software, you don't think of policy first. You think of getting the program to work. But when it comes to government, Africa is a young place when it comes to ICT and innovation. But instead of concentrating on developing ICT and innovation, governments concentrate on developing policy that limits ICT and innovation. For example, if I want to develop a drone, the first thing that government puts in front of me is policy. So instead of concentrating on innovation, how to be innovative to develop that drone, I tend to think about the policies that limit me from being creative. So my question is, how can government continue to introduce policies that limits creativity and innovation and still say we want to promote smartness and transformation in innovation? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe as we wait for somebody else to raise their hand, I'll ask one of the panelists to speak to this. I'll first ask probably Clément and, okay, Duron and Indrajit, if you can, yeah. Sheila, you'd like to speak to it as well? Just 1 minute, and you can probably give him a bit of insight on how we can put in place policies that promote rather than hinder innovation.
I completely agree with you. Innovation should come before policy, and I don't think actually any policy can come before innovation, because then it would be, policing something that does not exist yet. So I really completely agree that we shouldn't be saying I can't innovate because a policy prevents me to innovate. I just innovate, put the innovation there in a meaningful way that shows proactive improvement of ways people interact and access the most basic services, and I'm sure most of the time policy will follow. So in our case at Irembo, we are starting to more and more ignore policy and do things that really matter and improve the citizens' experience into accessing government services. And when they test it and like it, then actually drafting the policy might come later, so to get that to become mainstream, but it only can come and adapt to what innovations are there, because you can't again policy what doesn't exist, which is the case for even the large company we are seeing today in technology like Uber, Airbnb. They don't first get a policy for them to do public transport or so, but they do it, and because people like it, then governments, cities have no other choice than to find ways to accommodate them within the policy they have. So I think I agree with you.
Shortly, I don't disagree with you, because policies are limitations. Like any policy that you will have is a limitation. It's not, you have to put the right limitations, which is not easy. I can tell you there's a lot of opportunities, especially in emerging markets with smart governments, and I think we can look at the government in the country that we're right now in, where Rwanda was smart enough to create the right policies to open the country, to create the right business systems here. which for us it was a very easy decision where to set up our headquarters, and it was clear that it's going to be in Rwanda and not in other countries. It goes from safety, it comes to how easy it is to open a company here, how easy it is to work with the government, which I think there's not many governments in the world that it's easy to work with them. And Rwanda is one of the, I think, most advanced ones where we've done projects with the Ministry of Agriculture very quickly. You would try to do a project with the Ministry of Agriculture in the US, good luck. You're talking about a few very good years of banging on a lot of doors and a lot of money. So I think you can look at it as an opportunity and find the right ways to craft the right limitations to grow the emerging markets.
Melissa.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate that reframing. Policy can be openness, encouragement, enabling of these types of innovations. So it's not always a restriction, it's not always negative. And clarity around what the limitations are is helpful to business. There are significant privacy and security issues that need to be discussed and decide where the boundaries are. But then once you set the boundaries, the firms can operate and know where they've gone too far and where they'll get in trouble. So I just appreciate that reframing, that there can be a policy of supporting innovation just as much as there can be a policy of restricting it.
Okay, Sheila.
So, yes, just to add on what Melissa said, the fact that you can innovate and there are policies in place, already it feels like they allow you to do that. But what if there are policies in place that do not allow you to even do that? And we keep saying, and especially within hubs, and for a long time we kept thinking or saying, well, we can always just innovate and then policies will come after, but you can never solve the citizen, I think, at national level problems if you do not work with government. You might try, but it will be supplementary or complementary service. For instance, if you want to work in education, you cannot develop your own curriculum because you're innovative and roll it out in schools. Which schools? So unless you work with government on such things, then it will limit you to disrupt, if you want to call that particular industry. Health, education, even agriculture, for instance, if you want to do it at national level or at that big scale in solving particular problem in your country, then policies have to be favorable. And we've even come together as hubs and worked on a document we are calling I4 Policy that can then be informative to governments across the continent on what we feel are complementary or supplementary or even good policies to entrepreneurs that they would want to work with. Another key thing about policy and why now we are talking about it is, for instance, procurement. You cannot bypass the law and work with government if it does not include procurement for innovation. So unless it has that inclusion in it and gives a wider room for experimenting, then in essence, you will only just keep chasing shadows of the government and never, I think, work at that big scale. Yeah.
Indrajit?
Yeah, very, very briefly, I think my fellow panelists have covered most of the ground. I think that one has to also look at the nature of the sector. Yes, indeed, on one hand, policies have been rather restrictive in the past, but one must appreciate the fact that today there's far greater openness in terms of policy, far greater attempts to encourage innovation. So we have come some way. Obviously, in some countries, policies still remain very restrictive. But I think we should look at the nature of the sector, the nature of the beast. With these technologies, we are facing so many serious challenges, whether it on the internet, whether it be hate speech, breach of privacy, cyberbullying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you are obliged to have some kind of framework to ensure that citizens are safe and citizens are secure. So there are areas where your argument would hold that there are too many restrictions, and I think there are areas where regulation is required. So that's the way I look at it. And I think there is a great push globally. You could see the Korean example, that there are generations of leaders, young leaders especially, who realize the importance of innovation, even simply for the economy, and then are less likely to impose restrictions of all kinds. Thank you.
Louis, if you can just...
Yes, I just support the last contributor. I think, as you said, it's contextual. Innovation is contextual, right? So I would look at it slightly differently. And I think a couple of things that are important. One is there needs to be a forum for innovators to engage with government. One, to send indications as to what they're innovating and start having the conversations in that context. When government itself is a beneficiary, you will tend to see an even more accepting partnership in that sense. And so one of the things as for Africa that we do, and the example I gave before is important. We are challenging the use of spectrum. This very affordable TV band. In itself, if you try to have that discussion, you'll have a lot of people pushing back at you, the incumbents and everybody telling you, you can't use that space, blah, blah, blah. But if you put it in the context of saying, you see, Mr. Government, your whole thing about universal e-health, the whole thing about universal education, this thing will only work if everybody's connected. And I'm showing you one way to connect everybody in a very affordable way that everybody can participate and benefit from that. In that context, government will look at you differently, and policies are likely to be conducive because they're being put in a particular context.
I hope your question's been adequately answered, over and above. Great. Let's take one more question. The gentleman on the right, please.
Hello. Hey, thank you very much. I just wanted to respond to two comments that were just raised, actually. The gentleman from Microsoft just suggested that we needed a forum between government and the private sector. And as Sheila Bergen from iHub just mentioned, innovation hubs have come together from across Africa to articulate a public policy vision. And we're actually sharing that this evening at the Impact Hub Kigali from 6:30 p.m. So I would like to invite everybody here to attend the launch event for the I4Policy conversation, and also just to, in the form of a question to keep this legit, I would also like to ask for everybody on the panel if they could provide inputs on ways in which grassroots communities, innovation hubs, entrepreneurs could more effectively engage with governments. Thank you.
I think let's take his question as well. Excuse me? Let's take his question as well, and then we can do a combined...
Thank you. It's a segue into the last question. Also, if we go beyond policy and we talk about implementation and adoption, what are the cultural factors that enable or hinder, the implementation of a Smart Africa strategy? Specifically looking at the Korean example, what were the cultural factors that enabled the success that we saw in Korea, and what could be the same in Africa?
I think, Louis, you start that off. Yes, no. The gentleman on the...
I think that's a question best answered by the Koreans as to...
Yes. But if you could start with a question from the gentleman at the back about what specific actions or activities can be taken to enhance the forum for interaction between government and innovators.
Yeah, I think even in Africa, we now had pretty clear landing ministries or departments in government that relate to innovation or ICT or something like this. As to whether they have formal and structured fora to do this, I think depends on country by country. But I think this is an area, for example, where we can work with the hubs as a convening entity who can represent the interests of creatives in front of government, if government may struggle with the idea of dealing with individual entities. And I think there are other players, private sector players. I can speak for Microsoft, but I know some of the other players in the market are also people who are willing to create opportunities for this kind of discussion. So I know we regularly facilitate this, whether not just in country. I can tell you for a fact that we work with COMESA because we're trying to scale it even beyond a particular country, because some of the issues we're talking about transcend boundaries. Whether we're talking about intellectual property, we're talking about cross-border, movement of goods and things like those. We have regular fora. There exist regular bodies within COMESA Business Council, for example, of which everybody's invited to attend. And in that context, as an entity, you can raise a particular issue, and then because of their convening power, their influence, and so forth, they're able to push that. So there's many opportunities, and perhaps we need to explore more.
Thank you.
I might just build upon that. In addition to these four, which are extremely valuable and I think should be encouraged and continue to grow, I would also say that as you enter these types of fora or individual conversations with different government officials, to really understand what motivates them or what they consider to be important. I've had many government officials complain to me that they feel that they're the dumping ground for complaints from the private sector that are looking at particular issues that would be beneficial for their particular company. Now, I think that's their role, and they recognize that as their role, but also understanding the government officials need to balance the interest of a variety of stakeholders and frame opportunities as benefiting a whole range of different groups would help to speak to them better. And so I think they're just, and similarly, I feel that on the government side, understanding the goals, the needs, the orientations of the different organizations or firms that they're working with and serving would be beneficial. So it's just a broader framing of understanding the points of view on the other side and what drives them could help move the conversation further.
Thank you. Mr. Kim, if you could speak to the question on cultural factors that have led to the success in Korea, and are there any lessons learned? Are there any cultural aspects you see in Africa that we can be able to leverage as well?
Yeah, it's very difficult to find a good answer to that question. In case of Korea, in fact, Korean government have been leading always for the information society. But in the process, we have come to know that as people are using the digital devices, they are becoming more and more intelligent, and they are becoming more and more smart. So I think in case of Africa, people, citizen engagement and the citizen participation, that is very, very important, because government by itself, they cannot do everything. So if they can get help from the citizens in addition to the private sectors, I think it can be much easier for African countries to get more smarter.
So 1 minute. Let's see if we can pull that off. Everybody, one last message to the audience. If you were told in this last minute, pass on your message, then you die. Give me your 1 minute Give me your 1-minute message to the audience. What would you do as Rwanda Online and Friends, Microsoft? What's your message to our audience? 1 minute, real quick.
We can accelerate technology impact to all of our people. But if we put our efforts together and continue to remember that these innovations are a combination of different both technologies, but also ways to deliver and business models. And second, we need to start very fast, make mistakes, learn from them, but iterate on them, but accelerate really technology impact to our people.
I think I said it quite a few times that we have to keep the mass market together with the innovations. We have to bring them all. We have to bring everybody and elevate the whole population. And sometimes, like everybody likes to say, think out of the box, but sometimes you have to think in the box. You have to see what are the constraints, and then there are some constraints you live with them and you continue on. You're not trying to change them, and there are some constraints that you try to change. It's picking the right constraints to change and the ones that you keep and just find the way how to overcome them.
Yeah, I'll go off on a little tangent. When I see the opportunity we have in Africa, from an innovation point of view, from a transformation point of view of cities and so forth, I see a lot of data. I see a lot of private data. And I worry that we are moving so fast with a real risk of us not putting in place policies that protect, that address data, digital data protection policies and privacy policies. I find this as something that can be a massive stumbling block as we go about innovating or trying to solve other issues. We'll be creating bigger problems if we're not careful. So the challenge out here is let's address this before it gets here, the whole idea around all the data protection, and the privacy that comes for. And I go one step further and I say, in the context of this kind of forum, it's probably better to do it as a group of countries and Africa as opposed to trying to deal with it one-on-one, okay?
I'll also introduce a new idea in the final 1 minute. As Louis mentioned, the massive data, I'm worried that Africa doesn't have the people with the skills to analyze and appropriately apply that data. So the conversation around skills so far this morning has been about using technologies. I would love to see more Africans creating those technologies, more Africans analyzing those data, applying those data, and really shaping them to be most useful in the African context. So that's the skills debate I would like to have, yes, at that basic level, but much, much higher as well.
So I'll go back to the same analogy I had earlier. In a team, when half of the team doesn't come to training, the other half has to ask why the other side did not show up. We have to ensure and encourage inclusion, especially of women, young people, and people with disability in this revolution, if you want. And as individuals and people who are here, commit to the fact that it's not happening and we need to ensure that it happens. Yeah.
Well, very simple message. I think we should never lose sight, as has happened in the past, of why this innovation is important, and always keep human beings at the very heart of it. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'd like to thank our very esteemed panel members. I think you all pulled off the 1 minute, so none of you's dead. You get a second life. If I can quickly summarize, just as a wrap up to what I've heard from you, some of the dimensions we were looking to discuss today were improving accessibility and affordability of government services. From what I hear, we're saying let's be dynamic, let's accelerate, let's look at improving or increasing citizen participation, not only at the level of the end user, but also at the level of the skills that is required to create and to innovate. And then looking at big data, open data, copyright matters and ways to enhance security. Let's ensure that we're putting in place enabling policies so that they give the required protection, but at the same time, allow us to be able to be as innovative as possible. And I think most importantly, it's very crucial to consolidate. It's crucial to look at us as global partners in this and not just about one country innovating and accelerating. Let's make it a much bigger movement or revolution, if I can pick Sheila's word, and see how we can definitely transform our governments and guarantee successful smart cities. I thank you once again. You've been a great panel, and I thank our audience for having sat through with us, and I'd like to ask you to kindly give an applause to our very good panelists, and thanks. I'm sure you'll probably continue to meet them in the course of the next few days, so on their behalf, I'll take the liberty to say feel free to just pull them into a corner and ask any more clarifications or any additional questions you need answered. And enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.